All right, welcome back. Feels like a long time since we were here.
About a month, because
Is it? Are you
yeah,
serious?
yeah, because we
Oh,
talked.
we did the remote show on the other side.
Yes,
That's
and then before
right.
that, it was about a week and a half before your show. So it's been about a
Right.
month ago.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
apologies. It was Thomas's fault. Um,
what do you mean?
welcome back, everyone. This is the Minimum Viable Person show. As you probably already know, but if you don't, I'm gregarious. This is my good friend and colleague, Thomas Edwards. And this is a show, usually every couple of weeks, where we get together to talk about topics related to sort of living a more integrated life. We try to connect the dots between our personal lives and entrepreneurship, and sort of the challenges that we face in both sides, and actually try to point out some of the similarities. If you have not been here before, you can find previous episodes over at foundercraft.com. If you need to reach me, that is my email. Hey, where'd your email go? What? And it disappeared.
Don't worry. Thomas at thomasHunterJr.com.
There you go. All right, I'm going to figure out where to put those. But in any event, Thomas, how you doing, my friend? Do you have an orange sky also, or is that only San Francisco people?
San Francisco people. However, we are definitely experiencing a lot of haze, and sunsets look pretty scorched earth type, So I've seen pictures, and it looks like something out of a sci-fi movie. It's
like Resident Evil straight up.
Like apocalypse, like literally Resident Evil apocalypse type stuff going on over there.
It is weird because I feel like right now, yesterday and today, it snowed here in Denver.
I saw that, right? Like a 65-degree drop, right?
Yeah, 60, 70-degree drop. The day before, it was like 100 degrees. So I feel like a lot of people are experiencing a lot of things that they've never experienced before in their life.
Yeah.
And that they never thought they were going to experience, actually, which is probably the more remarkable thing. I don't know. Yeah, I titled this episode, anticipating autumn, because I don't know what to expect with this.
Yeah. And when I saw that, I was thinking, it's one of those things where, because of what we have been seeing happen over the past 8+ months, we're at a point where you either just choose and accept the fact that things in life will be very dynamic, maybe not to this level all the time, but having an idea that this is what it could look like, to learn how can you adopt and adapt to changes? How can you be able to pivot as the world pivots, right? And it's a good task for a lot of people. It's really bringing people to themselves to determine, am I cut out for this? Can I handle this, And what does that mean for what does that mean for anything that I'm doing, working on, feeling called to, purpose? It really does bring all those things up to the surface in ways that it's never done before.
Well, I think you're right, because to our broader theme, right? Like a lot of entrepreneurship is about sort of being agile and nimble, and being able to react to constantly changing environment and ideas, right? And so it is an interesting thought, like the resiliency required to survive today certainly feels, I would say, a couple of notches off of what most people are used to.
Yeah,
and
for sure,
if anything, it is a bit of Darwinism to some degree, right? Like not that I'm hoping for people to disappear or something, but more of there are traits that we have let lie dormant in many ways, right? As we got comfortable in our lives and the patterns and the flows of things, that now we're having to revisit it.
Yeah. And I want to acknowledge, choice of words, right? It's like resilience and then survival. Like
Yeah.
I will generalize this statement because I believe from what I've come across in my experience, I see this as true. Most people underestimate the resilience they have as a human being, right? Like we are actually extremely resilient as human beings, which is why we are considered like the most dominant species on this planet. It's because of our resilience, not because of our
technically
ability.
we would be the only ones who could consider ourselves that, though.
Yeah, I mean that is true, right? But think about it in the other side, right? Of when it comes to survival, like survival means very different things to different people. In my experience, seeing and working and being around people who are going through challenges, they're not in a challenge of survival. It's not like they're homeless and they are inconsistent with like the food that they're able to, they know that they're going to be able to have a meal, upcoming. They have clothes on their body. They are actually relatively healthy for the most part, right? These basic needs are actually fulfilled. But when we get uprooted from a place of comfort, we feel like we are now in survival mode, and that's not actually true. And so I bring that. I wanted to call it out because there is a difference, right? We are resilient in our ability to make the best of what's given to us, and at the same time, many of us. I wouldn't say most. I wouldn't say all, but many of us are not in this survival state that we claim to be in, because it creates this false mechanism that we were in a shitty place to begin with, which for many of us we were not.
So what this reminds me of? Like when people in Florida wear sweaters and everyone else is like, what's wrong with you people?
Yeah.
Right? There is a casual relativism that is at play there, right? Like,
very casual.
Like people who can't survive without AC. I'm one of them. People who can't survive without the internet. There's there's something to be said for that, I guess. Your job, right, etc. But the bar has been risen on what is survival versus like comfort versus sort of necessary, right? Like necessities, or sort of accessories versus necessities. And so there is a lot of change. You do get very used to a very small range of sort of change, right? And we get discomfort is the deviance, right?
Yeah, and that discomfort is what's necessary for growth and innovation, right? Whether it's from a business level, but also to a human level, right? Like when we experience hardship and difficulty, and that requires us to be resilient, that is where growth and innovation takes place all the time. Innovation and growth does not happen in complacency. It does not happen when people are lazy or content, right? It usually comes because there's a problem that has come up that has created a challenge, and our determination to solve it under any circumstance, right? So, this topic is exciting for me just because like we're still here, right? Like we 2020 for all intents and purposes have like the story has been like it's kicked our butt, right? It's given us everything. Carol Baskin's on Dancing with the Stars. Like like San Francisco now looks like Mars. You know what I mean? Like
wait, is that the lady from Tiger King?
Yeah. Right? The Kardashians not reuniting for another episode. Their 20th season is now finished. We see all these things going on, right? And like the NFL starts tomorrow night, right? We're experiencing such dramatic shifts in so many places, and we're still here. So that says something. So while we're here, let's do something.
Please.
Right?
Well, my son's, and he probably shouldn't be watching this, but his favorite movie now is Jurassic Park. Right? He's 5 because he loves dinosaurs. And, there's that whole thing about like how, they engineered all of these dinosaurs to only be female because they deprived them of lysine. And, Jeff Goldblum was like, well, he's like, are you sure? Right. And the next thing you know, of course, like they figured out a way around it. But I actually I'm curious of what you think about something, because there's sort of two countervailing sort of thoughts potentially here as well. I was talking to a friend yesterday, works at an innovation firm, and he was saying, I was like, I was saying, like agreeing with you that, it feels like a lot of people, now's the time that companies are having to confront themselves. He's like, well, and some not. He's like, so there are a lot of people who are like, meh, like they're kind of like, let's wait it out, right? Like, or I don't know, like they're just like resistant to change, or they're hoping everyone else will die off first, right? Or who knows what, right? And then there's, of course, like the other thread of people who like this sort of cognitive dissonance, like reality distortion field, that actually ignore, like, so it feels like there's, even though what you're saying makes total sense to me, it feels like there's this other realm of people like that have this opposite way of reacting to this sort of environment.
Yeah. I mean, Peter has a great comment here. I want to acknowledge it. It says, most of my life and even more of my career is spent in constant fear and unknowns. Not only is it growth, but it taught me to embrace the chaos as I create and evolve. If I stop evolving, something is wrong, right? And in his truth, like that works, right? Like unknowns, uncertainty, I'm not a big fan of fear, but I get it, right? Like the constant discomfort that is not knowing what's going to happen drives people to growth. And other people need security. They need to know what's going to happen. They need certainty. And so in this world right now, they don't have that. And it freaks them out. And I totally understand that too, right? And then there's others who, I don't know if it's responsibility or being casual, but ignoring it altogether and kind of like going as if it's status quo does have its benefits. And there's also the necessity to acknowledge like what's actually happening. So there's this balance that I feel like you gotta play with, but not living in either. Right?
It's funny you say it, because like, I've talked. I think I've made this comment here before in the past too. Like my wife and I feel like are opposites. Like we're just, you just described Maria versus me, right? Because like, and we like we butt heads constantly because of it. But to some degree, maybe that makes us more survivable together, right? Like, because she has always been sort of like, not because I think, well, I would argue because I think she prefers that side. She would argue because she has no choice. But like the idea of like her being sort of the stable, on the corporate side of the house, like, and me being the entrepreneur on the risky side of the house, right?
Yeah.
And like it's just like philosophically, like she's much more like good and diligent about planning things, but at the same time, like likes to think things through a lot, and to some degree, like to her own, I would say to her own detriment, because I think she can like cause herself to worry because like starting to like try to anticipate all the pieces outwards. And I'm like the opposite. Like I like to think outwards or into the future. I'm also a hypochondriac in my own ways, right? But the reality is, like, I think like as an entrepreneur, I've been burned so many times from thinking too far ahead that I just inherently am like, my natural position has become, we can deal with anything, right?
Yeah.
And so
that speaks to your resilience, right? Like that experience has allowed that to grow inside of you for now.
No, totally, but you're right. Like, it's a way to be. It's not the only way to be, right?
Yeah.
And like, so I think like the interesting thing is like, I probably wouldn't have acknowledged this as much in someone if my wife wasn't this way.
Yeah.
Like, or I wouldn't have had as much empathy for the other side of it, right? Like, because like, it's easy to be dismissive of people who are outside of your mainstream point of view. Not your point of view is mainstream, but whatever yours is, right?
Yeah.
And so it still goes back to that thing though, like the people who are like ignoring stuff, right? Like that's happening. I don't understand that. That's like a new group to me that I have a harder time. Here's the thing. I could rationalize reasons why they are that way. I'm more trying to understand how you get to be that way though, right? Like,
well, this
what's the emotion that's in play more so than the rationalization, right?
Yeah, that's a good question, because here's an interesting take. Like I don't think this is new. I don't think what you're explaining is actually what you're talking about is.
I don't think it's new at all.
Yeah, because
I'm saying it's new that I have to encounter it in the scale, because I guess like
the scale.
we've never had a shared experience like this culturally that we have to like sort of see things like this, right?
Totally, that's to your point. You're exactly right. Like it's the scale, right? Like everyone on this planet is impacted by COVID, right? When you think about it, right? Like, not even 9/11, right? When you think about 9/11, the global impact is actually not even is not comparable, because every individual, every child, every child born and not born yet has been impacted by COVID, right? So that's really the scale in which this goes. And was interestingly enough, like coming into the suburbs, like I noticed microcosms of ignorance and hiding, right? Because sometimes what I've experienced, and this is me sharing personally and being vulnerable with people about this, like as I've been living here in the suburbs, which is not something that I am used to. I've noticed like, and that's actually like a good thing. Like I've come to love it. Like I'm a burbs guy now.
Even is nice. Don't let anyone tell you it's not nice.
Yeah, it's awesome, and I'm able to see instances where I'm like, oh, now I get it. Like, when you're in the suburbs, you're also like getting away from, urban living, which also, it includes like the environment, which also includes like, the frequency of crime, the frequency of traffic, you know what I mean? Like, and inside of those, because you don't see it as much, you actually like get to not see it, right? Like you get to not see as much crime. You get to not see some of the systematic issues that may be going on in front of your face, because you're just outside of it enough to not be consistently exposed to it, right? And after a while, you're kind of just like, like you get it and you understand it, but your emotional connection to it isn't nearly as strong because you're just not in it, right? And there's different levels, obviously, to being in it. And so COVID is becoming one of those things too, because let's face it, like there are some places on this planet where like COVID is not as highly impacted as other places. And so for appearance's sake, like it doesn't look like it's a big deal, right? And it's very easy
it's our shared mental ghetto.
Yeah. And so it becomes easy to like disconnect from it, and this is human. I can't call it good or bad. This is just human nature. We're not, right? When we're not exposed to something, we don't get to experience emotional impact of that, right?
I would say I'll use my own change moving here in the same vein. When we moved here from San Francisco to Denver, I didn't realize what like that analogy about the frog in the boiling water.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't realize the tension, anxiety, stressors, like all the things that are embroiled in like urban life.
Yeah, energy.
And more importantly, and also like San Francisco techropolis urban life, right? Like you don't kind of feel, you don't know what that means until you leave it, and then you're like, what the, like, wow, you just feel like this weight off of you, right? And at the same time, for example, like, you probably saw my post, like where I was like really reminiscing about how much I enjoy living in Colorado now.
Yeah.
I never ever would have done any of that shit in San Francisco. I wouldn't even own a bike. I was scared to ride a bike to begin with. I wouldn't have ridden one in San Francisco, right? And we wouldn't have had a place to store one, right? Like, just all these things like that. And now I got to ride a bike like every day, right? Like, and being able to like go on vacation and looking forward to like taking my bike with me to explore outdoors. I'm not an outdoors person, right? Like I tell everyone, I spent 40 years of my life in the city, right? Like that's not me, right? Like I don't like the beach, right? Like I still don't like the beach, right? And it's really interesting, like to your point though, that what's possible changes when you remove yourself from the context of what's known, right? Yeah. And the second you do that, you have new eyes, right? You can see the world, the way you want to. I don't know why LinkedIn is not somehow naming people, but here's a good comment we got. Like I felt a sudden time crunch with the passing of the current pandemic. Sometimes you need to get up and do something about it. Amen.
Yeah, that is such true, right? And that. Thank you, LinkedIn user.
See if I could find out who it was.
Yeah. But I love that because what you're saying is you're now choosing to take responsibility for this, right? Like there is a part of your life that you can and still can take responsibility and do something about it, right? Like I think we sometimes, and I say we loosely, like there's many of us who will see conditions change, see environments change, blame the environment, right, for our lack of showing up or our lack of performance or our lack of anything, right, or feeling happy. And then we become a victim to it, right? And so when we become a victim to it, that means we're giving the power and the responsibility to the environment. And now the responsibility is now on the environment to change in order for your situation to be better. And like, in this case of COVID, that's not going to work because we don't know how long this is going to last. One thing we do know is that we're not going back to what it was before, right? And if you're not there yet, then God help you. But we're not going back to what it was before. Things will be different. Things will shift from here. But what is going to be your part? Like what responsibility are you going to take to make this situation, this current experience as best as possible, right?
Well, here, let me ask you a question. What about the people who are denying that anything's happening, right? Like that are like, this is just temporary. It's a blip on the radar, and then we're going to skip ahead. And at some point, something that looks like the old thing will be where we resume, right? I feel like this is a common mistake that humans make all the time, right?
Yeah.
Which is that we don't pay attention to the nuance, and so we gloss over sort of the things. Like we're pattern matchers by default, and so we sort of just look for the grossest version of the pattern, the most grotesque version of the pattern, and just say, same, right?
Yeah.
Like it's the classic stereotyping of like anything, right? Like you take a situation like, oh, this is just like that last time. Well, no, it's not. Actually, there's like 1,000 things that are different, but you're just sort of rounding down to, or up to sort of the biggest number, right?
Yeah.
What's going to happen to those people? Like, I mean, like, it feels like there's a lost opportunity here, right? Like for you to change.
Yeah, I mean, this is another way of deflecting responsibility, right? It's just kind of like, oh, well, things will fix itself. Like and I believe that there's parts of this that is temporary, right? There's parts of this that is temporary, but like at the same time, doesn't mean I'm not doing anything, right? I'm just going to sit here and wait, right? Like when has that really worked in people's lives? Sitting and just waiting for opportunities to come, chances to come your way for you then to take advantage of it, right? We know as entrepreneurs and we know as high-performing people that is not how we go about life, right? Like, because we don't know how many opportunities are going to come, and so we got to go after them, and we got to make the best of them. There is no waiting. We hate waiting, right? And so for those who are just kind of sitting there and waiting, I hope they end up becoming okay. I actually don't know what's going to happen to them from an emotional and mental impact, because once again, if this goes well into 2021, are they still going to wait? Are they like, how much mental endurance can someone withstand just waiting for what will end up being, a year and a half, 2 years, if this goes on that long,
Yeah. I mean, I guess the question is, everyone's not a go-getter or sort of like, like when you work with people, right? My guess is that most often you're working with people to empower them to be more proactive about the change they want in their life.
Yes.
Right? Is that the way everyone should be?
No. No, and I can't necessarily explain why, but for some reason, like internally,
I agree. By the way, I agree. I guess that's what I was saying is that some people are their role in life is a supportive one.
Yeah.
Right. Like if everyone's a leader,
then there's no one following.
It seems like but I guess yes, but also more like everyone would likely go in their own direction, right? Like, and so probably less the probably negative connotation being follower, but more about like consensus, right? Or agreement, right? Or any of those other things. And so it is interesting to me, like it feels like, we talked about this in like earlier episode, like where some people are like, it was like, no, go fuck off. Like, I don't have to like learn something new because we're quarantined, right? Like, I don't have to like, I don't know, like I have 100 friends apparently to learn how to bake sourdough bread, right? Like, but like people are like shaming other people because they weren't doing more with the time or something, right? Like, I don't know. Like I also worry that that's like, maybe I don't want to give the wrong impression, right? Like now is also a time for recovery and recuperation. If the busyness of your life and you never had a chance to take a break from it, to the extent that you can, or you have any extra time, this is also a good time for that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess where the doing something comes in for me ultimately revolves around caring for yourself and your family if you have one, right? Like it always starts there. Change, adopting, adaptation, growth, innovation, it all comes from starting with yourself first, being in that position and capacity to grow. And that for me is what leadership is all about. Whether you're a supporter, whether you're a promoter, whether you're someone who's all about the process, or you're someone who has the vision, right? Like you as a leader have to set the tone for others to see and be inspired to take on their own leadership. So, in some ways, like, I guess the term leaders is weird because then if there's, everyone's going in their own directions, but ultimately, when you think about leadership, it can just be a universal element for the individual, right? To lead yourself. Then those who are inspired may follow. They may create their own path based on what you've done. But like, we all have a capacity to lead ourselves in the right direction, but it starts with ourselves. And what that turns into, whether it's sourdough baking or resting recuperation or whatever, right? Like, is up to you. But this is your time to care for yourself.
Yeah, I think there's leadership and there's leading, right? And those are like, there's a distinction, I guess, in there. And I think you're right that only you can lead yourself, right? Like that doesn't mean you have to lead others, right?
Yeah. No.
And it is a good time to try and do it. Peter makes a great point here. He says most people struggle to venture out and gain the perspective they need to fit that role of a proactive go-getter. And I think that that's the distinction that we are trying to make, maybe struggling a little with, is that you should be a proactive go-getter minimally for yourself. Yeah. Right? Not necessarily for others. And I think what happens a lot of times is we collude the two of them. Right. And people like us, like entrepreneurs in general, we view them as one and the same. Yeah. Right. Like, so we're like, run the charge and bring everybody with you. Right. And that's a powerful and important role, but it is not definitely one for everyone. But I do think, the comment you made earlier, if you sit still, there's very little, if not zero chance that the change you're hoping for is just going to happen, right? Yeah, yeah. Unless you are an extremely well taken care of person. With many, many people who are attentive to your own needs and interests and desires and things, and can see things for you and do things for you. And also you're the kind of person who lets them do those things for you, right? Yeah. Also known as a child. Right? I don't see how you just get these things don't happen, right? Like if you can't be proactive, right? Now I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying you have to do it alone, right? Like that's not what we're saying, right?
No, not at all.
Intentionality is kind of the thing that matters, right?
Yeah.
Peter's other point, though, I think, is that the diversity of engaging with other people, right, is really part of the power of learning other ways to be, right? And to some degree, what this time is great at and bad at is getting us to connect with more people than we likely didn't. I would honestly say people probably talk to more people now, but I would guess for some like a significant amount of people, they're actually talking to more people now than they used to.
Yeah, you and I have talked about that, right? Like I remember, if you remember, I said that there was a time back in 2009, 2010 when I said eventually we will get into what I had referred to at the time as an analog phase, where we'll actually be using technology for the purpose in which it was intended, which was to bring people together, not to disconnect or use it as kind of like a barrier to make it seem like we're connecting to people, right? And alas, here we are. Technology being leveraged more than ever before. Education using the platform to bring people together, obviously with, not without its difficulties and challenges, but like we're now seeing like the importance of how technology plays a role in like keeping that human connection together in a way that we took for granted previously. And that's something
I've talked about this many times as well, that like technology has this sort of sine wave effect to it, right? Or sort of like Mobius strip kind of thing going on, like where it's what it first does is it's supposedly designed to create stronger connections.
Yes.
What those connections tend to do is actually force isolation, right? And then that feeling of isolation causes the next wave of technology to bring. It's like it's the whole nostalgia thing, right? Like there's always going to be nostalgia because people keep going back to what technology took away from the thing that they lived and experienced, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that it actually necessarily, most likely didn't intentionally do it, right? And it's also possible that they're not good users of the new thing, right? But either way, right? Like it always happens that eventually it becomes nostalgic to go back to an older time, right? We always reflect on an older time because it had the imperfections of humanity with it. So, by the way, so Peter, Victor had a question actually for us that's related to what we're talking about. He said, we went back 100 years in certain aspects of Western society. Why haven't we learned? Or is it too hard for people to learn diversity and inclusion for some reason? What are we not teaching people? And I think this is a little bit more probably about sort of race and diversity, but I think it applies equally to actually what we're discussing now because they actually feed each other.
It's really interesting. You got to remember 100 years is what, 4 or 5 generations. So certain programming, certain messaging, certain upraising of 100 years ago still exists today, right? And so if there is a lineage,
some of them are laws that are enforced, still today,
and still upheld by those who keep the same programming as those 5 generations ago, right? And so, and those are the influencers, right? Those are the actual political, legal influencers of our country. When you think about it, right? Like many of these people have been around since the early 40s, 30s, some of them 1920s. So 100 years ago is actually not a lot of time because some of those people are still practicing those ideals today, in this very day, right?
Without a doubt,
and so
it's your point you made about the suburbs, right?
Yeah.
Because when you're in the bubble of an idea, no time isn't moving.
No,
right?
You're just in this space, this relative space of existence.
There's no evolution, right? Like because there's no oxygen for like any new ideas to actually penetrate.
Yeah, and then you combine that with complacency, and now that becomes a breeding ground of wanting to like pass this on to the next generation of those who exist in or born in or raised in the bubble. you know? And it's not to say that like, I mean, obviously like one solution is to pop these bubbles, right? But that's easier said than done. But
see, unfortunately, we see what happens when you pop the bubbles. The federal militias are brought in on you, and
yeah, right.
Shit gets burned down. Both of which are bad.
And this may be what is required in order for this to take place, because what this is doing, these fires, is it's creating like these. I mean, I hate to use this as an analogy, but smoke signals for people to see what's going on and actually put attention towards it, right? To see, and some people will still ignore it, right? That's just the truth. But there are others who have tried to ignore it and now no longer can, right? And the more we start to see that experience happen, the more we'll start to see a break in the passage of the programming from generation to generation.
I will say, I'm still cynical that any meaningful change will come of things, unfortunately. However, I do believe that a meaningful number of people's eyes are open compared to before.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know if we'll be in our. I don't know if we'll be in our lifetime.
Yeah.
I'm actually more thinking about Solomon and Ellie, right? Like maybe they may get to see it in their lifetime. I like to be hopeful about it. We will see, but anything sooner than that would be shocking and shockingly embraced.
I agree entirely. Look, I hope to overlap with some of my sons and your daughter's generation.
Yeah, right.
So let's hope that we do see some. Here's the thing, you need a drip before you can have a flow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe this is the first of the drips, right? Like in the process. But Harrison had a comment, by the way, that I thought was just one of my favorite terms in here. He said, "American culture of rebellion combined with felony stupidity," which is my favorite term, and national response has led to the current conditions. But COVID-19 will be with us forever. But the pandemic will burn out by 2022. Meanwhile, we need to address opportunities from the new normal. I think that's actually really insightful, because what we were saying before about like this being one of those few shared experiences that like globally, right? Like it's very rare and odd for something like this to happen, that something that's a non-extinction level event, right?
Yeah.
Which who knows, maybe still time. But but it is interesting.
Yeah, and like also you gotta understand the US is also its own bubble, right? Like we've seen other countries handle operations a little bit differently than we have, and have seen different varying levels of their own resilience, right? As a country, as a community, as a culture, And so when you read COVID-19 will be with us forever, I wanted to point out that like that is true, right? We now know that this is like Ebola and SARS and the bubonic plague, right? Like these are things that will be around forever because now they've brought to our awareness, right? But he's also acknowledging that the pandemic will burn out by 2022. Like now, if the timing is correct, then that means some of the operations in which we're carrying our lives will cease to exist by then, which I want to make sure that it's clear that there's a distinction between that. Just because COVID-19 is here to stay doesn't mean that like this current condition of our lives is here to stay, right? Like
no, I read what he was saying is that the imprint, I think, is going to be lasting, right? Like today Solomon was here doing his gym class on the iPad and then showing me like all these exercises I've never actually seen him do before, and he even did some push-ups, right? Yeah. And I'm like, wow. And like, I was like, I've shown him how to do a push-up. He just never did it before. But him watching it on the iPad somehow was like the thing that got him to do it. Like, so, there's the COVID generation, right? Like there's kids being, socialized through like their very formative ages right now in this weird environment of, hands off, distance free, remote learning. These were things that let me put it to you this way. You know how you said you don't think you'll ever see in our lifetime?
Yeah.
The same probably could have been said for education, right?
Mm.
And yet, schools went from never doing anything remote to doing everything remote. Right?
Yeah.
And I get the social part. It's hard for us to understand, but the other part is measurable. Are they being educated? Right? Like, are they learning things? Right? Like,
yeah.
Right? Like, I feel like it's not the same scale. I get it, but I do feel like humanity has the potential to adjust.
Oh yeah.
Necessity sort of demands it, right?
And we're gonna see it too, and it's gonna happen over many years. I mean, we as individuals are going to make industries and bubbles like education completely be overhauled and changed, never to be seen the same again. And it's just going to take some time, right? Because the industry itself doesn't like change, just like we don't like change as human beings, right? And so we're going to be resistant. We're going to even ignore it. We're going to try to move things forward as if nothing is happening. And then eventually we're going to be like other industries are going to be at a crossroads. Hey, listen, like, people are just not comfortable going into, schools and college campuses, and people are getting sick, and now you're sending people home, and we're still not, and we still have to pay $40,000 a year. That doesn't seem right. We're not going to be doing that anymore. And then we're going to see like a lot of shifts happen from that. And this is just one industry, right? We haven't talked about real estate. We haven't talked about government. We haven't talked about healthcare. And so I want to bring this back to what Harrison said, and obviously to the theme of our conversation, right? We need to address opportunities from, I don't like to call it the new normal, I call it the current normal, because that'll also change. And this is where our conversation has started, right? Like, anticipating, but also like deciding what you want your autumn to look like. What do you want fall to look like for you? What do you want September, October, November, December of 2020 to look like for you? Like, think about that. Don't wait for someone to tell you what it gets to look like, right? There are tons of opportunities, and inside of your ability to be resilient as a human being, you now have an opportunity to grow and innovate in your own life first. And maybe that could also be something that could be innovative for an industry or innovative for a business venture that you might have been thinking about. But it always has to start first, with you first. So think about that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, because I think, like, to whatever degree you thought this was just going away, well, it's not. So let's pretend for 6 months that you were intentionally denying it or just being hopeful that it's not going to go away. Well, it's about to be winter. You're going to be inside more, not less, right? I do think now you've had your chance to get it out of your system, but now you should accept this as a new beginning or a new opportunity for a beginning. And so I agree with you entirely. Like, what are the things that you're going to do to change, right? To create the reality you want on the other side, right? And here's the thing. Don't set things that you can measure and judge that are realistic, right? Like, you always want to launch a business. Great. That business happened to be a restaurant. Stupid idea, right? Now, what this is a time for is learning all about what does it take to run a business, right? Like, learning about how the process works, how to source things, learn how to cook like your own meals, right? Like, there's a lot of other things you could be doing, because right now is obviously not the best time to go start a restaurant. But doesn't mean that in 6 months or a year from now that it may not be time. But now what you've been afforded is time and an opportunity to potentially try and turn those commutes instead into an investment in yourself, right? Yeah. All the time that's back, you can invest in yourself, right? If your kids are home, I know it's rough, but I think you got to appreciate it for what it really is. Most parents, like we've talked about this too, the amount of time we normally spend with our kids is so small, like modern parents, right? On a daily basis when we were working, right? Like, you drop them off to school, you pick them up at 5, 6 o'clock, whatever it is. You have an hour or two to play before you put them to bed, right? And then maybe you got the weekends if everything goes well, right? You got a lot of time. You got the kind of time our parents certainly didn't have with us, right? Like, whatever generation was before, they didn't have the same amount of time, right? Definitely not if you're an immigrant, right? No. And so you got to look at the good side of that as well, right? Like you're building a more resilient kid, you're building a smarter kid, you're building a more emotionally intelligent kid by having them with you and the time with you to learn and to pass along a lot of great things. That's going to pay a dividend, I would hope, as well when things return to the new normal, right? I mean, I just don't want to be. I remember I made this comment the other day, or like maybe 2 months ago, like that when COVID was over, and someone commented back there like, "Well, aren't you the optimist?" And I was like, "Wow." I was like, I guess maybe that seems like a thing you can't imagine, but for me, that doesn't feel optimistic at all. It just feels like it's
feels
gonna happen.
reach. Yeah, it
right.
Feels within reach, And I think to your point, that's a great theme, Like there was a professor. I always botch her last name, but it's like Libemersky. Anyway, Libemersky. I'm just gonna guess. If I botched her name, I'm sorry, but she actually had percentages of like what actually makes us happy. I might have talked about this in a previous episode, but only 10% of your happiness is based on life circumstances. Yet, in my experience, this is where I've seen most people spend 90% of their time trying to change, right? Like, and the truth is, like, you have a great example of like what can make yourself happier and more successful, which is having a perspective that actually feels like that feels true to you and allows you to live a happier life, right? Having more time as a parent, like you and I both know, right? As having immigrant parents, that like that was a luxury for us, and now we get to give it to them in a way that who knows if that would have ever happened for us, right? I don't think our children will ever forget this time, from a perspective of how much time they got to spend with mommy and daddy.
Well, because here's the crazy part, right? Like I was telling Maria this or something. I forgot who it was, but they don't know. We long for the path we imagined for them, but they don't know the difference, right? Yeah. So like we're judging it by what they're missing out on, and they don't know they're missing out on anything, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Like, so we're like, like I really wanted, Solomon to be back in kindergarten. I want him to be able to experience like what it's like in the classroom environment and how to make friends and all these other things. But the reality is he was doing a lot of these things. He was already in preschool, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, this whatever sadness I feel about it is more so because of what I was hoping for him, less so than because he feels deprived or saddened or whatever it may be, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
His grandfather is his best friend at this point, and he doesn't know any better. He doesn't have any idea that anyone else could be his best friend, and that's cool by him, right? Yeah. Like he's happy.
And there's something to learn from that, It's like they may be oblivious to what's going on in the world. I mean, obviously, like you can inform them of what's going on in the world and stuff, but like their mind doesn't work in a sense of like, what do we need to do to survive? Right? Like they just they get it, and then they do what makes themselves happy. Their mindset is so limited to the past and to the future that it just allows them to be present to what's going on right now. And there's something special that we all can learn as adults because we all used to be able to do that as kids. So if we're able to apply, if we're able to apply that now, I feel like so many of us could
which ultimately goes back to the original point you made, right?
Yeah.
As we started this conversation, which is that what we're used to is what we lament, right? And so it's the same thing, right? Like when you're used to a thing, right? Like we got used to what the thing that to having a thing we imagined. And so when we don't have it anymore, we don't have any imagination left either, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah, and so we get to yeah, I mean we and this is the beauty of even this conversation, because we're also even able to express like some of the the great things that has come from a seemingly like terrible situation, right? And like it's moments like this that I hope can inspire people and give other people hope that they can see their path in which something great can be experienced inside of something that can be seen as so dark.
Yeah. I would say my takeaway, and lines up with your advice, is plant seeds, right? Like, and I use that metaphor because I don't think anything you can do right now, and most things in life that are worth having, like, take time, right? And so, it's our constant need for instancy that I think is part of the problem, right? Like, so use this time as an investment, invest in yourself, invest in your health, invest in your family, invest in your relationships, right? Like, I can't see how there's a downside to those things, right?
Yeah.
There are lots of downsides and there are lots of negatives, and I'm not pretending that any of those things aren't happening. But, as they say when you get life serves you lemons, you make lemonade, right? And so start to plant the seeds for what's next, right?
And the beauty is there's no rush, right? Because the conditions allow you to take your time right now. That's one of actually the biggest gifts you can receive from the situation, is that there's no sense of urgency or rush to do anything because the world's not moving in that way anymore. So,
and it's the same true experience that everyone is stuck in basically the same way, right? Like, so, with there are exceptions, and of course, but broadly, a lot of people are in a similar kind of environment now. So, everyone's going at the same slowed pace for the most part. And by the way, the people who are always going to be great and leaders and winners and the more successful are always going to be the people who figured out how to move faster than everyone else, regardless of the speed.
Yeah. And experience plus talent creates those situations. And that doesn't mean that it's not inside of you either. Like, I think it's those who are listening and watching, these things are also inside of you too. It's just a matter of tapping into it. And there's no better time to explore that than now.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a fun combo. I do think it is a good time, if, as we are all here anticipating the fall itself, right? There's a lot that all of us are probably thinking about and trying to figure out what we want to do next. I think what Thomas and I are both saying is you don't have to know the answers, but now's a great time to explore, right? Like, and start to invest a little bit in thinking about the future. Doesn't mean you have to act on anything yet. And that may give you the time, right? Like, to figure out something meaningful. If you're an entrepreneur, it is also one of those wonderful times where there are millions and millions of people thrust into new environments and new circumstances that if you are trying to find or create a business opportunity, there may be many. They may be short-lived. We don't know, right? Like I think, as we said, some of these things are going to stick around after and some of them won't, right? It's hard to know entirely, but, you might be able to guess a little bit. So it could be a good time to be considering doing your own business if it's something you can do online or from home. Turn your side hustle into, your extra hustle, right? So this has been a fun combo, Thomas. Thanks for jumping in this week, as usual.
Yeah.
We will be back.
Oh, I was going to say shout out to Peter, Harrison, and other people who viewed and
Victor and whoever LinkedIn user is. But we will be back. What's today? 23rd, I guess, for another show. If you have topics, ideas, or questions for us, by all means, just shoot them over. You just leave a comment down below. You can always, of course, email me, Gregarious at Foundercraft, or Thomas at thomasedwardsjr.com. If you want to reach Thomas. I don't know why your banner disappeared from here. But we'll see you soon, and we're always happy to be here, and we hope this was a little bit helpful for everyone out there.